Welcome back. Marketing 3401. This is Professor Roundtree here. We're going to dive into Chapter 9, which deals with new product development. As you remember from Chapter 8, and throughout most of the course up to this point, we've been focusing more on strategies and understanding how we can sell, promote, market products and services that are already in the market. They currently exist. And now what we're trying to do is to kind of shift a little bit and talk about products and services that are new to the market and some of the differences and nuances when we start dealing with new products. So we'll talk about new product development strategies and discuss a process that many companies go through to try to develop new products, and we'll talk about how some of that is done inside an organization and some of it is done outside an organization. And then we'll talk about, once you have these new products out there, what do you do to manage this and the development of these products. They're like new children to many manufacturers and marketers. So you got to figure out a way to nurture them. Sometimes you may not want them to grow too fast, and you want to make sure you give them the best shot at becoming successful. And then lastly, we'll talk about a product life cycle, and we'll talk about what that is and how you can use it strategically to use your P's, your strategies at different points of the life cycle for any given product or for a service. And then we'll talk about a couple of additional considerations toward the end. Now, most companies, especially in this day and age, if they're in any way technology-based, you see it a lot with technology companies, companies that are biotech, for example. They'll always have an option to create the product themselves in terms of developing through traditional research and development. You have your own scientists, you may have your own engineers, you have your computer software engineers. These people are there to try to discover new products that they want to bring to the market. But what's common more recently is that these companies go out and they acquire startup companies. And so in a lot of ways, many companies like Google, they do this all the time. They use entrepreneur startups as the incubator for certain ideas. And if the idea is taking off, they'll go and acquire them. That's why, for example, Facebook went and acquired Instagram. Just watched Instagram grow, figured that there really was something to this instant communication by using pictures. It integrated really well into the existing Facebook platform. And so for them, the question that they had was, do we go out and build our own, or do we pay $1 billion for Instagram? And they went and paid $1 billion. Google also tried to buy Groupon, and Groupon said no. I think they offered them $6 billion about 2 years ago. Groupon's been falling on some hard times. But again, looking at the daily deals market, Groupon was the largest player, followed by Living Social. And so Google said, we need to get into that space. And so should we start from scratch and build? And their answer at the time was to try to acquire Groupon with no success. And they've started their own most recently, not doing necessarily all that well. Now, we'll talk about this general process, and we'll take these one step at a time. We'll talk about idea generation, where they come from, internal, external, what people do, organizations do to actually screen good ideas and bad ideas. And then we'll talk about how they develop different concepts, they test them, develop a limited marketing strategy to try to bring it to market, figure out from a business analysis standpoint, is it something worthwhile? Not all ideas are good ideas, and if they are good ideas, they just may not be profitable, or they may not fit into your overall business strategy. Then they go out and they actually develop the product, test it, and then get to this big red box here, red letters. It's commercialization, meaning it's out in the marketplace, full force marketing, trying to sell, get as many customers as you can, and hopefully build the market and retain market share, because if it is a successful concept, you will have imitators who will come to the market. So generally, I think I made this point a few seconds ago. Idea generation, a lot of times you can do this internally. You have lots of brainstorming meetings across departments. Ideas can come from anywhere. They can come from salespeople, they can come from marketing people, they can come from engineering people, research and development people. the important point in most organizations is to have an open forum for people to bring good ideas. Most of the good ideas come from obviously people who have customer contact. They have a feel and an ear for what needs are gone unmet. And so you have to have a formal mechanism to bring all those good ideas to the forefront. Many of the ideas, quite frankly, sometimes they're just copycats of other ideas, or you take existing ideas external to your company and you reshape them, you repackage them. Most ideas generally are not new and revolutionary to the point where they're completely new. Now, of course, the people who were involved in issuing patents in Washington, D.C. here will basically decide whether or not a new product deserves a patent and whether or not it's significantly different from something else that's actually out there. But again, the important point, some of these ideas come from inside the organization and some come from outside the organization. And so some of these sources can obviously be, for example, a place like Google. I think they allocate about 10-15% of each individual who works there. Their time is allocated for them to work on projects other than what their current job is. And some of those turn into really great ideas, extensions of existing products, new products within Google. And what they're trying to do is to foster a culture of what they would call intrapreneurial vim and vigor. And so they want people who have entrepreneurial spirit, but who are doing it partly for themselves and then also partly for the company at large. And again, many of the sources externally will always be from those relationships that you have. Obviously, customers are great. Looking at what your competitors do is always a good thing. Keeping an eye on their innovation and making sure that they're not leapfrogging ahead of you in a significant kind of way. Distributors, suppliers, all these people have an ear for what's going on, as I said, an ear in the ground to what's actually going on there and what types of things end consumers are actually looking for. And so the real overarching point here is to make sure that we have an environment that fosters good ideas. There's a common concept now, a very common concept now, called crowdsourcing, which basically means that you bring all sorts of people together to try to develop new ideas. You may have heard of crowdfunding. This whole crowd kind of concept refers to bringing people together who may have different needs, concerns, they're with different firms, but they all have one common goal, and that common goal is to make sure that they are a part of some kind of innovation process. A lot of times you have many joint ventures that come out as a result of this crowdfunding. It's a great way to bring scientists and researchers together, talk about ideas, and at some point bringing really good ideas to market. So sometimes it's better to be a co-creator and bring a revolutionary, innovative idea to the marketplace rather than spin your wheels internal to your organization. And the idea is to bring the ideas to market, and there's usually enough to really share. And so you'd rather have a small portion of a very large, ever-growing pie than to have a large percentage of a pie that's not there or it's not growing at all. So when we think about the universe of ideas, we go through a lot of brainstorming internally, externally, and we have a bunch of ideas. So the question is, are all ideas worth pursuing? And the answer obviously is no. It's not even close to being worth your time trying to pursue everything. And so you have to ask yourself a few questions, and just in terms of organizing your thoughts in terms of this framework, you have to ask yourself, is there a real need or desire for whatever this product is solving in terms of a problem or a need that it's satisfying? Is it really real, or is it just that there's some technology or something revolutionary or innovative that exists? I would probably argue that many things that we see that come into the marketplace, when it's technology based, you may see something revolutionary. When the iPad first came out, revolutionary. Now there are dozens of companies that make tablets, and so if someone decides they want to bring to market a different type of spin on the tablet, the question would be, do we really need it? Ask yourselves the question, do we really need 3D TV in LCD screens? I argue, just in personal taste, I don't envision myself ever buying a 3D television. But then again, maybe that's just me. So once you figure out whether or not there's some real ideas out there, you have to ask yourself a question: can we win if we bring a good product to market? And winning means really having some sort of sustainable competitive advantage. So if you can't patent it, you can't protect yourself and keep others from bringing knockoffs to the marketplace. So if the technology isn't patentable, and oftentimes that's what keeps people from throwing a lot of money in terms of investment. Patents can take several years before you're granted one. And they have what we call provisional patent, which basically says we have a patent that's under review. And then they have what we call utility patent, which basically says you have an idea that you can bring lawsuits against people who infringe upon that patent. But before you get that utility patent, you have no legal protection. And it's just so easy for someone to knock you off, meaning they copy your product, oftentimes get a copy of the product off the shelves, reverse engineer it, and figure out a better and cheaper way to make it. And sometimes what they do is they cut the cost significantly, making it overseas in China, putting it out on the shelves at maybe 50% of what you put it out there for retail-wise. And then the last one thing you have to be concerned with, is it worth doing? I mean, is there sufficient profit? There may be sufficient demand out there. But even if there is sufficient demand, looking at your costs and what your price structure is like, can you make a decent buck? And keep in mind, the most premium prices are always going to be when an innovation first comes to the marketplace, where you have these innovators who really, really want to make sure they're the first to get the product. And typically you can skim the market by charging a lot more for it early on. And the next stage that we talk about typically talks about developing the concept and testing it. So we obviously, if we have a great idea, hopefully it is a great idea, it should be a good idea, we need to look at it and say, is this something that we can bring to market? Again, you can look at some of the numbers and decide, do some research to figure out if this unmet need really needs to be satisfied. Then what you do is you come up with some sort of detailed version of the idea. And you essentially take the benefits. You can create a brand name for it. You can create a prototype for the packaging. All these things are really trying to get to the point where you have something, a concept that you can actually test. They generally call it concept testing. And when we do concept testing, it's very common in industries like automobiles, where they're constantly testing new products, new innovation, body shapes, certain features that might be included with the car itself, essentially bringing people in who are knowledgeable about the category, sitting them down, and asking them what they think or feel about what you're putting before them. And so many firms routinely test new product concepts with consumers. And then once they look at the results from that, they can turn it into an actual new product. Now, of course, the time period from the time you have a product test, a concept test, to the time it becomes commercialized can be several years. Go to the automobile shows that they have all around the country. Many times you will see concept cars from all the manufacturers there. And they always look space age. They look so different compared to what's on the street right now selling and people are actually driving. Those are typically your concept cars, the ones that have gotten past that stage where they believe that there is a market for it, but the market may not necessarily be ready, or depending on the features that they're adding, maybe manufacturing-wise, they haven't figured out how to work out the costs where it makes sense to make that kind of investment. And so when we think about any kind of new product, you got to concept test it first. If you don't concept test it, it's going to be a recipe for disaster, as they say. Marketing strategy here, once we have a concept, then we have to, I would call this an abbreviated or shortened version of a marketing strategy. But we still get at some of the core principles that we talk about all the time when it comes to marketing a product. Figuring out how you can describe who the target market is. Remember, going back to segmentation, targeting, positioning, how would you describe the segment? So using the card context, we can argue that part of it might be descriptive kinds of segmentation, where we talk about income and ability to pay, maybe age, depending on the actual type of car. Maybe a certain gender might be more predisposed to buying a particular new concept car. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about lifestyle issues. It's going to be about behavioral stuff. And so, again, describing the target market, figuring out what the value proposition, what is it that people are getting from buying this new concept car? And then saying, can we make any money from it? Sales are great, but just having sales doesn't mean that you move forward. You have to have profits, so you have to get your costs under control, which is where business analysis comes in. I mean, this is the stage where you get all the bean counters, the number counters, all the people there who have pretty good insight in terms of cost structure, figuring out the best way to have cost savings, getting the best prices for the raw materials. So you get the buying center involved that we talked about before. We'd get people from research and development, the engineering types of people. We get finance involved if we're not going to use cash and we need to raise capital for it. We'd get the people in manufacturing and their engineers to figure whether or not we have the physical plant and equipment to make this new product. Engineers will tell you how you can use existing facilities, maybe to retrofit 40%, 50%, 80% of it, and then the other 20% or maybe a little bit more would be this new concept car. So you really want to try to continue to reuse existing facilities. That's always the important point. But again, the important point here is making sure that we know that it's cross-disciplinary, cross-departmental, where we get people to actually look at what's going on as it relates to the business side of a new idea. So let's assume we got past the hurdle of all the folks who are giving us the financial blessing, and it kind of makes sense. And so what we'd do is we'd have some sort of testing done. We would develop a product, we'd develop a prototype, something that we can put into consumers' hands, have people test drive it if it's a car, something where we can get something rolling off the assembly line. A prototype for a physical product, I mean, that can run you tens of thousands of dollars. When you talk about all the injection molding and all the stuff that they do from a manufacturing standpoint, and obviously after that it becomes cheaper, but that first prototype can be very expensive. That's why for a large company it's a little bit easier to do compared to somebody trying to start a product company where they're manufacturing a physical product. Between the legal fees in terms of patents and trademarks and looking at trying to create a prototype, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars for an individual entrepreneur, but for a company that may be something that's relatively small. Okay, and so we want to find out, does it make sense for us to make that investment? And then we'd say, is this something that can be turned into a workable product that we can eventually sell to an awful lot of people? And so the next stage will be we have to figure out how we can actually go out and test it. Any of the fast food restaurants, they have concept testing kitchens all around the country regionally. Wendy's, McDonald's, Burger King, in this example here, we talk about KFC. They have kitchens, and that's what they do. They make food, and they have concept tests for new flavors, new recipes, and they're constantly trying to innovate, shaping and reshaping their menu. About 25 years ago, you guys may not remember this, but there was a point where McDonald's did not serve breakfast. And they only sold lunch, and they opened up around 11 o'clock, and then they were open until maybe about midnight, and they sold lunch and dinner. And they realized they were losing out on a significant opportunity. And so right now, I think the number one menu item in terms of the different types of meals is breakfast. And so when they first brought that to market, it was revolutionary. A fast food place where you can go and have traditional breakfast types of items. Okay. And so once we do the test marketing, and we got to figure out exactly how and where we go to do our test marketing, there are several cities and states around the country that are considered to be a microcosm of the entire country. For example, Columbus, Ohio is a marketplace that is deemed by many, many marketers to be a prime place to go in and test market. Why? Because they believe it is representative of the entire country. And so many new products are introduced. Restaurant products in terms of fast food. It could be a concept for a restaurant versus a fast food restaurant. It could be introducing a new physical product. Many people go to Columbus, Ohio, and some other cities around the country because it's deemed to be representative of the entire country. So when they actually do this test marketing, you can do it in a couple of different ways. And this screen here kind of draws the contrast between doing test marketing and developing marketing strategies for new items compared to completely new to the world kinds of stuff here on the left side. And then also those things that are more an extension of things that they do. So for example, you may not have to develop a new marketing strategy, for example, for line extensions or very simple line extensions. You can make some inferences with a little bit of research. You can tell whether or not having an added ingredient for a particular product where you can add it as another SKU on the shelves for, let's say, toothpaste as an example. But when we think about market testing, typically you're going to do market testing when there's more at risk. So if we're talking about a brand new product where there's huge investments in plant and equipment, lots of money being spent on trying to patent the idea, hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in legal fees and the like. And also, too, we're not really certain whether or not this is really going to be successful. So what you try to do is to, as they say, kind of float a test balloon out there before you dig a deeper hole. And so sometimes what will happen, you'll spend a couple of $1 million, maybe $10 million for a large company, and then you find out you need to put the brakes on because this idea is not going anywhere. So the ones where you really don't necessarily need test markets, we have lots of copycat products that are out there. Apple was pretty much, I believe, the first to market with tablets and the iPad. Now every manufacturer of electronics has some sort of tablet device. You don't do it if it's really low cost. I mean, it's just really easy to actually go and manufacture it, prototype it, and actually put it out there and kind of see if it dies or if it's successful. Now, in terms of test markets, there are three major types. I think I mentioned Columbus, Ohio. That's an example of what we might call a standard test market, which is really a real live situation where people live and breathe in the city, and you decide to go in and put a new menu item on your menu, open up a new store. That's going to be what we would call a real live test market. And then we have some others which are more in a controlled test rollout. Where you try to control all the activity in terms of the marketing activity that might be going on related to some of your other brands, as an example. Not having anything crazy going on with a competitive product, not competitive product, but a product that you currently put out there as well. So for example, if you're introducing a new chip in the marketplace, and you also own Doritos and you also own Lay's, you want to make sure that there's not a whole lot going on out there that might have an impact on people's willingness or ability to buy this new flavor. So as an example, you put out a new flavor of Doritos. You don't want to run a promotion for the traditional standard Doritos, which might increase demand for the standard product that they have out there. So you want to make sure that you don't go crazy with marketing for one of your other products because it might mask potential success of another product that you might be putting out there. And the simulated ones are also going to be the ones that have I guess more control over it. You make sure that you have certain things taken into account and controlled. So you basically have a controlled environment like they do with laboratory experiments. So let me talk a few minutes about some of the general pros and cons here, advantages. So when we think about some of these, generally we talk about these types of tests. and simulated test markets, as an example, it's going to be less expensive. You don't have a whole lot of costs going into marketing. It's a simulation. Less expensive. You get some faster results. It actually restricts access by your competitors, meaning you're kind of in a stealth kind of way, trying to uncover whether or not there really is a demand for your product. So if you don't want to tip your hand, sometimes a simulation will work better rather than actually taking that product and putting it on the shelves where your competitors can readily see it. The main disadvantage there is it's not considered reliable because you're controlling for everything. And always remember, the more stuff you control in a test, the more unrealistic it is. And so when you actually put it out there to fight for shelf space and to fight for consumers' eyes and attention, you don't have all those controls that you would have in a laboratory setting. And lastly, once you get to the point where it passes all the tests and you say, hey, green light, go, we have to figure out how we're going to commercialize it. And so some of the questions you need to ask yourself is, when do you want to launch this product? Where do you want to launch it? The launch may very well be in a different city from the original test. Remember, the test in Columbus, Ohio, or wherever, is really telling you that this is a viable idea for the country if we buy into the fact that Columbus, Ohio is a bellwether for the entire country. And then you have to have some plan in terms of how you're going to actually roll this out. Now I'm going to separate this video into part 1 and part 2, and we're going to end this part 1. And so next we're going to talk about new product development strategies generally, and then we'll also introduce this whole concept of product life cycle. And so I will catch you back on the other side, part 2, chapter 9.